Hey everyone, Charai5 here, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. I can't wait to go through the Knuckles show with you guys. This was a really fun video to make. This was a big project that I started pretty much when the show was released, and one of the things that made this video possible was today's sponsor, Raycon. Now, if you've spent time watching other people's videos, you may already be familiar with Raycon. They're the company behind the everyday earbuds, and they must be doing something right if they have over 3 million units sold of this model alone. Now, they come in a variety of colors. I'd only ever really seen the black ones, but since green is my favorite color, I got a pair of those and wow, okay. So, something to know about me is that I'm not an earbud guy. They don't really feel comfortable lodged inside my ears, or sometimes they just won't sit well, causing them to fall out. But one of Raycon's biggest selling points is their ergonomic design to suit any ear shape with maximum comfort. And yeah, you just twist it in slightly and they're pretty secure. Which is excellent because sometimes chores need to be done around the house, and I love listening to music when I'm doing chores. But that doesn't always mean that other people around the house like listening to the same music I do, and even though, like I said, I'm not really an earbud guy, I'll pop them in then. And when I have to do particularly physically intensive chores where I'm moving around a whole bunch, it's nice to know that the everyday earbuds will stay in place and I don't have to worry about them falling out. The same can't be said about their charging cases though, and while they are pretty cool charging cases sporting a 32-hour charge which can be charged wirelessly, not gonna lie, I didn't know they could do that, that's pretty cool, you either have to carry them in your hand or your pocket. But if you don't have either available, you could also get the protective case which lets you hang it anywhere. And if a solid color isn't exactly your style for a charging case, they do offer the protective cases in a variety of patterns on top of a layer of added protection. I'm gonna sound like such an old man when I say this, but I'm honestly shocked that so much sound can come out of something this small. I don't typically like wearing earbuds in both ears, but I tried it on with these and wow, the sound you get out of them. Like, not just the volume, but the clarity too. Music, that's an obvious go-to for anybody talking about any sort of audio listening device, but I don't think I hear many people talking about just straight up speech. Like, yeah, they'll talk about podcasts and whatnot, but I've never heard anybody talk about how those podcasts sound. So I tested that out too with another video that I edited that's kind of podcasty, and I'm surprised that something that's connected wirelessly sounds as good as it does. Like seriously, I could edit audio with these, and I never thought I would say that about a pair of earbuds, much less wireless ones. Okay, one more thing before we get into the video, and Raycon didn't ask me to talk about this, but I just think this is so dope. They threw in one of their magic 180 cables. I didn't know they made these, and they're sick. They have a double nylon braided cord, which makes them more durable. One of the ends rotates 180 degrees, so you can sit your device wherever you'd like without having to further bend the cable. And best of all, the tips are magnetic, so you can swap it out for either USB-C or iOS, and I think they do have a USB-A extension as well, but I just think that this is really cool, really well designed. And if you want to pick up any of the things I talked about today, you can head on over to buyraycon.com/Charai5 to get a 15% discount plus free shipping. Yes, there is one less R in there. So if you're in the market for affordable, durable, and honestly just really impressive earbuds, I think Raycon is the way to go. As always, supporting the sponsors also means that you support creators like myself, so thank you so much to Raycon for helping make this video possible. Alright, on with the show. Ahead of the release of the third live-action Sonic the Hedgehog film adaptation, we got the long-awaited limited series Knuckles, starring Idris Elba as the titular character, Knuckles the Echidna, and Adam Pally as the returning character Wade Whipple, a local deputy from Green Hills, Montana, where the movies take place. The advertising for the show made it seem very promising, and like it would expand the world of the Sonic movies, though I did have my reservations about the idea. I suspected that they wouldn't change the character or the world too much in order to avoid any backlash from people who only wanted to watch the movies so that they didn't feel like they had to watch the show. It would have served as a cute little side story in between the second and third movies, and I mean, yeah, I'm kinda glad I was right about that. There is a huge caveat to my prediction though, and I'd like to go through the show with you explaining what my thoughts were as I watched it, because the reception to it has been pretty divided. And like, I understand completely why that is, but we should venture into the first episode so that you can hopefully see why. Obviously, spoilers for the show ahead, keep watching if you've already seen it, or if you don't mind going through it with me. I'll try not to explain every single story beat and joke in this, but as the show went on, it was pretty difficult for me to not make note of a bunch of different things it was throwing at me. Though not by much, episode 1 is the longest of the 6, and it establishes almost everything we'll need to know about the show. As such, it's the one episode I'm probably going to go the most in-depth with, just because there's a lot to explain before heading into the rest of the series, so just bear with me.
One day, I hope to visit this cool ranch of Doritos.
The premise is honestly a pretty simple one, on the surface. Knuckles is getting used to his new life on Earth and continues to train his abilities, creating makeshift obstacle courses for himself. Honestly, and with the way he ends the obstacle course, I'm kind of reminded of the Illumination Super Mario Bros. Movie. Knuckles hurries home because he thinks the Wachowski house is in trouble, but we find out that it's just construction workers trying to repair all the damage done to it from the second movie, and I love that. It not only gives us a frame of reference as to when this show is happening, not long after the second movie, but also off the bat acknowledging its events and consequences of them. I feel like they'd normally just start us off having the house already fixed and not really addressing it beyond a "remember when you put a hole through my wall" joke? This first episode features cameos from Tika Sumpter as Maddie, the group mom, Colleen O'Shaughnessy as Tails, and Ben Schwartz as Sonic, and my first thought when I saw it all together was that I love how the characters look, despite the fact that they perhaps clash more with the live action than in the movies. Their designs have changed somewhat, but I by no means think that they look bad at all. James Marsden doesn't appear as Tom Wachowski, but his absence is explained by him being out of town, and fair enough. I'm glad they don't linger on it, but it does kind of feel weird that everyone, even Ozzy the family pet, is there, but Tom isn't. I love the characterizations, despite how different they are from the games. Sonic definitely seems like he's maturing from his role in the movies. He's still easily excited, but definitely seems to understand the gravity of Knuckles' actions. I should explain. When Knuckles arrives at the house, and given his movieverse characterization as a warrior, assumes that the construction workers are there to invade, and so deals with them, let's say. Maddie doesn't know what to do, and so goes to Sonic and Tails for advice, with Sonic telling her that he'll talk to Knuckles. Sonic understands where he's coming from, struggling to adjust to this new world, and already this is a nice setup, following a logical next step from the movies. Where it goes wrong is when Sonic suggests that Knuckles make himself at home, because the next morning, the house is in further disrepair because Knuckles has fashioned himself a version of the Iron Throne from A Song of Ice and Fire and a fighting pit where he plans to have Ozzy fight his greatest foe, the Mailman. Something to note already by this point is how many jokes they throw at you a minute, and something that remains consistent throughout the course of the show is that with so many jokes, a lot of them land okay, some land hard, and some just straight up crash. As a result of this behavior, Maddie decides to ground Knuckles, a concept which is clearly unfamiliar to him, but that he kinda takes on the chin. We're introduced to Wade and the premise for his role in the story, which is preparing for a bowling tournament, something that seems to be incredibly important to him, and oh boy does this take a turn. We're introduced to the only human character perhaps more eccentric and over the top than Robotnik, Jack Sinclair, who is on Wade's bowling team, and apparently some kind of bounty hunter? And dude, I completely forgot what the hell I was watching during this scene. Nothing even remotely Sonic related happens in it. It's just talking about how Wade isn't fit to be part of the bowling team and how he's being dropped in favor of a little girl. It feels like I hit the remote by accident and turned on something else that just so happens to also star Adam Pally. Weirdly enough, the show cuts back to Sonic and Knuckles in their room, and we get a little bit of information regarding just how long it was that Sonic was on Earth before the events of the first movie, having lived here for 7 years, which is kind of a neat thing to learn about. Nothing that really changes anything, it's just a cool little piece of trivia. Sonic explains all the different things Knuckles can do while grounded, which is pretty funny considering these are all things that a normal kid would be grounded from doing. Obviously though, none of these things interest Knuckles since he just wants to keep training. He pleads to his elders to give him some sort of sign to know what to do, and this is the first appearance of Pachacamac, who I'm only just now learning the proper pronunciation of, played by Christopher Lloyd, who does a pretty good job voicing the character. Rather, I think the voice fits the character. I'm not entirely sure about the characterization itself. It's a little too goofy for me. I also don't really like that he seems to be an actual ghost rather than a vision that comes from Knuckles' memories of him, because it gives him a weird agency that raises a lot of questions about his character. Nothing that ruins the show or anything, it's just weird that he has a lot of knowledge about Earth concepts like the Mets and how often they lose. Pachacamac tells Knuckles that in spite of his quest to safeguard the Master Emerald being complete, he still has more to do, and that he should seek out an apprentice to continue the legacy of the Echidna tribe, suggesting that Wade be his student. Why? We're never told, other than him being special on the inside, which, alright, I guess. I also loved reading through this newspaper article about Wade winning a Hot Pocket eating competition and about the many different eating competitions he's won. Pretty funny stuff. Pachacamac also mentions Wade's intention of attending the bowling tournament, and again, it's one of those things that makes you question how he knows this. I just feel like there was a better way to have Knuckles and Wade's paths cross, and also feel like there could have maybe been more weight to Pachacamac's role in his relationship to Knuckles, but this is the convenience we're going with. That being said, I do like the idea of Knuckles being tasked with this because it's a way to keep the spirit of his people alive, and it's something that I don't think we'll ever see in the games, but that I would love to see as part of a Knuckles storyline. It makes sense for his character, but I also understand that there might be a matter of sanctity at play. Knuckles asks Wade to let him join him on his trip, and though the subject of Knuckles being grounded comes up, it's just as easily dismissed, and the two are on their way to Reno, Nevada. We do the classic animated character as a passenger in a live-action car sequence, and we have some Knuckles puns which are lame, but Adam Pally makes them work. Wade's such a dork that I can't help but find how charming it is that he tries so much. They try bonding over music, and it goes about just as well as you'd expect. We're introduced to the antagonists of the show, Agent Willoughby, played by Ellie Taylor, and Agent Mason, played by Scott Mescudi, better known as the artist Kid Cudi, who performs the credits theme for the second movie.
Agent Willoughby, we've got a problem. Knuckles has left the Green Hill Zone.
Oh shit, the Green Hill Zone. They're zones because they're monitored that way by Gunn. I actually really like that. We also see our third antagonist, simply known as the Buyer, played by Rory McCann, and no, it's not lost on me that Knuckles was sitting on an iron throne and one of the bad guys is played by the Hound. One of the biggest bombshells they drop in the show as it relates to the rest of the continuity is that Gunn has their own warp rings. I was shocked at that, but also like that it sort of implicitly explains that they're fully aware of creatures like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. Honestly, I really like how their introductions were handled, mostly because they give us just enough information for now. I love that they've incorporated Knuckles' love of grapes into his live-action counterpart and gave us an accurate depiction of how he might eat them given that he has no individual fingers. Love that joke. Wade takes Knuckles to a bowling alley to explain why this is, as they call it, his battleground. They don't focus too much on teaching Knuckles the ins and outs of the sport, but you can tell that he at least gets it, and we get an insight as to why this is also so important to Wade. As kind of stupid as Wade's backstory is, interjected with an admittedly pretty funny TJ Maxx joke, it's rather simplistic and human, which definitely gives it charm. He likes to bowl because he used to do it with his dad, who abandoned him and his family one day, and the sport makes him feel at home. I think what adds to taking it seriously is Adam Pally's performance. His face may be stained with buffalo sauce, but he plays it so seriously that I genuinely believe him and can overlook that fact. And at this point, I'm left thinking that it is interesting seeing these two very contrasting characters team up. It extends beyond a fish out of water and straight man story. Neither are really the straight man, they're both silly in their own way, but can be the straight man when the scene calls for it. Their bond isn't even based on relating to each other. Honestly, I thought they'd use this moment to talk about Knuckles and his relationship to his father, but the scene is cut short when the lights come down and disco night begins. I think this scene also shows why these two characters surprisingly work together. Wade is always shown as a pathetic weirdo who nobody takes seriously. No one outright hates him, but the world definitely looks down on him. Knuckles, on the other hand, isn't socially conscious enough to know any better. In a lot of ways, he may not be as clumsy, but he's just as strange in this world, so he sees the potential in Wade beyond just being told that he needs to take him under his wing. The moment is interrupted when the gun agents show up and try to take Knuckles. It's funny that Mason's "Do I look like I need your power" is based on how it happened in the trailer for Sonic 2 rather than what actually happens in the movie. Holy shit, is Agent Willoughby a terrible shot. I feel like she had plenty of opportunities to actually hit Knuckles, and she just never does. I love that they're continuing to use the quills as a source of power for humans to fight against the Sonic characters. Particularly, it seems like Knuckles is, but it could be the Echidnas? I'm not entirely sure yet. Oh shit, okay, Wade's going to use one of the gloves. That was pretty stupid of them to just leave those there. The credits are very charming and capture a unique aspect of the 90s. Granted, Guardians of the Galaxy kinda does this too for the 80s. I just appreciate that it's not the same pixel art because it's a video game adaptation kind of credits. I don't mind when they do that, but I like that they went for something different this time around. Overall, episode 1 was fine, had a couple of laughs, felt surprisingly short. I had to check because I thought these would all be an hour long, not 30 minutes. From here on, I'm just gonna focus on scenes that stood out to me, and I'll do my best to contextualize where necessary.
Your last words will be a plea for a merciful death from the warrior known only as Wade.
The bad guys show up, and yo, Ice Cap is a ski resort. I love how they adapt the different Sonic levels into these locations. It's not that it's necessarily clever, but I like that they function more as passing references that fans will appreciate if and when we catch them, rather than calling attention to it like, get it? Here's the thing you'll recognize. Oh, the credits for the last episode now serve as the intro for the show. I kinda love that, and I don't know if I've ever seen that before. And using the song The Warrior by Scandal is brilliant too, having used it already a couple times in episode 1. Wade shows up to rescue Knuckles, but he has to think of exactly how he's going to achieve that. I'm not gonna lie, this fantasy scenario feels entirely unnecessarily long, kinda reminiscent of the wedding scene in the second movie. It's not that funny, and it just feels like we lingered on it a little too much, and that's coming from someone who likes the wedding scene in the second movie. Interesting that Gunn has been studying Knuckles and creatures like him, Sonic, and Tails, but honestly it makes sense that they would. I wonder if that's going to factor into Shadow's backstory in the third movie.
Is that what you think? That I'm no one? compared to the great Ivo Robotnik.
I think this is the first time they've name-dropped Robotnik's first name. And what I think is curious is that they pronounce it Ivo. I've always pronounced it like that, but apparently the correct pronunciation of that name is Evo?
My name is Ivo Gerskovich.
I think Tails mentions it in a Tails tube at one point.
Dr. Ivo Robotnik.
Okay. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think the absolutely catastrophic fuck-up of Wade's plan didn't have me laughing my ass off. I think that, weirdly enough, that's how the comedy is able to shine in this. It's stupid, yes, but it's also so stupid that it can't help but make me laugh. It makes you wonder how someone came up with this material and didn't get the ideas vetoed. It does miss sometimes, just like the movies do, but there's a very particular brand of comedy to it compared to the movies. It's not an intellectual kind of humor, but more so comedy that gets you because it's not exactly predictable. I feel like a lot of generic movies and shows, especially ones with video game properties like this that you would think would try to be more child-friendly, have comedy where you can guess what the punchline is going to be as it's set up, but here, there are times there's hardly any setup, just punchlines you don't see coming. Like, dude, the way the fireworks go off in Wade's car is so fucking stupid, so convenient, that I can't help but laugh out loud. And okay, I will say that they immediately pay it off with a joke you could see coming from 10 miles away as soon as the scene started.
At least she's still drivable.
To that point, I'm going to make a prediction, purely based on what we know about Wade and how stories like this usually go, that Knuckles will be freed by a massive mistake that Wade makes that just so happens to let him free.
And that's why I signed up for Gun.
Oh, thank God they're calling it Gun and not G-U-N. I'm not gonna lie, I actually did see Wade doing something with the condiments, and that's just by virtue of how the scene is framed. They didn't focus on any one thing, they just gave us a wide shot so that they could give us the information we needed for it to pay off. That thing with Mason's mom, yeah, no, not funny. I kept thinking there was a good joke coming, but nope, him getting interrupted in the middle of a fight by his mom is the joke. And don't think I haven't noticed that we're already halfway through this episode and Knuckles has spent all of it so far kidnapped and doing nothing. I like Wade as far as a loser character goes, he's not annoying to me at all, but we didn't really sign up for the Wade show, and that's kind of what it's feeling like right now. I think this is a good time for me to bring up the fact that I was bracing myself for this. A couple of days before the show was released, we had gotten some reviews for the series, most of which were incredibly positive, which made a lot of us very hopeful. But when you really read through some of them, you noticed that a lot of them really focused on Wade for some reason and rarely talked about Knuckles. Allegedly, some of the crew were even joking about how happy they were that Adam Pally was finally getting his own show. I think that if I had gone into this not knowing that, I'd be a lot more disappointed than I am. Wow, I'm kind of shocked. I was wrong. Wade actually saved Knuckles somewhat competently. Like, he still did something stupid, but he didn't rescue Knuckles by way of an accident that makes him look brilliant. I can't help but feel like they should all be dead, though. First time we see Knuckles glide, cool. Did we ever see him do this in Sonic 2? I can't remember, but I don't think we did. And while on the subject, another example of how this show does its humor in unexpected ways is during this reveal. Wade claims that he didn't know Knuckles could fly, to which he responds that he can't, that he can only glide short distances. Immediately, my mind thinks that some tragedy is going to happen as a result of this revelation, but nope, we practically smash cut to Knuckles landing safely and Wade eating shit in a dumpster. I didn't laugh, but honestly, on paper, that's pretty funny. And now they're just stealing a truck? Okay. Okay, but you know what I did laugh at though? They obviously can't just steal this truck. Wade points out that they have no keys, and so Knuckles' solution is to just stick his knuckles into the ignition and voila, the truck works. Like, what the fuck? Why? See what I mean? I could not have predicted that, and it's so stupid, I can't help but burst out laughing.
I don't know about you, but I am starving. Hey, look, a Burger Shack! Let's go eat!
Oh boy, what kind of bullshit are we gonna get into at the Burger Shack? Honestly, nothing. They sit down for a meal and have a nice chat about, of all things, perspective. And it makes sense that having merely escaped, Knuckles doesn't consider what just happened a victory, but Wade posits that sometimes you just gotta take things as they come. Even if it's not the way you would've liked, even if it doesn't look the best, a win is still a win. And Knuckles doesn't really push back on the idea, he's willing to see Wade's perspective. Not a huge deal, but I'm not a fan of how the exposition is dealt with between Willoughby and Mason about their relationship to the buyer. I feel like it could have been handled more neatly. I like learning that Knuckles is well-traveled, but doesn't really understand the concept of home. We sort of already knew that last part because of the previous episode, but it's not just because he likes going to different places, it's because he lost his entire family. And damn it, Adam Pally is just really charming as Wade. He's a dumbass, but he's not harmful, and I think that's what makes him work. And it's weird, but I like how their relationship very much contrasts with Tom and Sonic's. Tom is very much a straight man to Sonic's antics, but can be a little silly himself from time to time. Sonic can be a bit overbearing at times, but is always well-meaning. They're two characters that sometimes need to meet in the middle, even though it's not always easy. Wade and Knuckles, however, feel like they meet in that middle almost effortlessly, despite how different each other's personality is, because they're able to relate on very simplistic terms. Still though, I feel like we only ever get a taste of Knuckles during these conversations, whereas we learn more and more about Wade. And maybe that's just because we, as the audience, know Knuckles from the offset, but I feel like there's so much more Wade could be learning about him. So they're jamming out to Rock You Like a Hurricane, which is a nice bonding moment, but I really hope that they allow Knuckles to enjoy some hip-hop, since that's more his style in the games, and especially if they're listening to 80s and 90s beats, come on. Them going to Reno, I feel like the obvious joke has to be Casino Night Zone in some capacity. You know what's funny? The radio station they're listening to is called the Rock Zone, which is cute, but I don't think there is a Rock Zone in the entire Sonic series.
I'm sorry, Mom, but she sucks so bad.
Holy intro sequence, Batman. So for context, Wade and Knuckles need a place to lay low while there's a bounty out for Wade, and he takes them to his childhood home where we meet his mom Wendy and his sister Wanda. And Wanda has this massive dick measuring contest with Wade, and again, this is an instance where I feel like I'm watching some random Netflix comedy, not a show based on a Sonic the Hedgehog character.
What is this sorcery? Wade? Wade?
Dude! Knuckles can like press some kind of SA charges, right? We get a Jewish joke about Wade's mom pronouncing Knuckles wrong, which, okay. I mean, she's not presented as like super Israeli or anything, and it's a common word in the English language. It's kind of funny, again, in that it's so stupid, but it also veers a bit too much on too dumb a joke for my liking. Okay, so it's Shabbat, which, for the uninitiated, is a Jewish tradition celebrated on Saturdays, seen as a day of rest and of religious remembrance, also known as the Sabbath or Shabbos. And Wade has this flashback to his childhood of his family having a Shabbat dinner, and it is just so batshit and goes on for a little bit longer than what you'd expect a traumatic flashback like that to go on for, that, again, I couldn't help but laugh at how stupid it was. Like, I sound like a broken record, but I'm consistently surprised that this show keeps making me laugh for reasons I can't see coming. There's a weird non sequitur about Wade making an excuse about saying Knuckles is Jewish on his mom's side and asking him to go with it because Wade doesn't talk about all the grapes Knuckles eats, and it's not exactly funny per se, but it's made funnier by the fact that the reason that even came up was because his mom asked if Knuckles was Jewish, with Wade fumbling to explain that he was, followed by Wanda doing the "I'm watching you" thing, which isn't funny at all. So it's almost like they tried to make up for that by having this continuation of the joke before it. It's so weird.
Everything looks so brown.
God damn it, that really got me because I really relate to that. Not that Mexican cuisine can't be colorful, but I'm just so used to food being brown, orange, or beige, so I can't help but laugh.
Where are the grapes?
They're in the wine, buddy.
Wow, I never thought I'd hear a joke about Knuckles, grapes, and wine in an official Sonic product, but there you go. Holy shit, I cannot stand Wanda, dude. This absolute child works for the FBI? This is the first character, I think, in this entire live-action universe I've actually disliked. Wasn't a huge fan of Rachel in the first movie, but she made up for it in the second one. Wanda, dude, I cannot stand. Okay, so, man, this sucks. As Wade's mom was describing Shabbat to Knuckles, I was kind of expecting this to be a kind of sweet moment where Knuckles learns more about human traditions, even if it is just from one perspective, about how the history of Echidnas was similar to Jewish history, which could have been poignant, but they kind of reduce it to, oh, your people were wiped out? They try to wipe us out too. We're the same. Which, I mean, no, not the same, but I can kind of see how this could have worked if it didn't feel so reductive from a narrative standpoint. I get it, the Echidna tribe isn't real, but it is in this movie universe, and they're kind of just not properly exploring it, I guess, because we have to move on to the next joke. I think it's really telling that Gun is pretty much unknown in this universe. I mean, granted, in the games, it went pretty much unknown until Adventure 2, and they properly reveal it in the second movie, but it kind of hits home how underground Gun is as an entity when even someone who is tangentially related to the FBI isn't even aware of their existence. Wendy says that Knuckles claims he almost destroyed the world in order to protect the Master Emerald? Is it me, or were we not supposed to get that sense in the second movie? As far as I knew, all he wanted was the Master Emerald, not to destroy the world over it.
And I'd gladly do it again.
Okay, so this is a moment that by itself is not funny at all, but I couldn't help but lose my shit after Wade and Wanda are fighting at the dinner table like little kids. Their mom steps in to shut them both down, and then they do this wide shot of them all just at the dinner table, and Knuckles is just there, looking at them awkwardly like a guest absolutely would. This is not what I signed up for with this show, but honestly, I'm just along for the ride at this point.
I'm sorry, Mom. It is what it was.
What the fuck is wrong with this psychopath? That's not in the script. I literally blurted that out the second Wanda stabbed Wade's arm with a fork. I can't believe that's actually a sentence I have to use to describe what happens in the show, but I also can't believe that's a thing that happens in this show. Okay, so Wendy's kind of an asshole because Wade understandably gets upset that he just got stabbed and wants to remove himself from the situation, but she has to make it about herself and the fact that her husband left. Like, what, dude? I can't tell you how just fucking insane it is to me to see Knuckles the Echidna next to a Beavis and Butthead poster. Yo, another reference to Keanu ahead of his performance as Shadow in movie 3. And also, I love how the poster in Wade's room is for the movie Speed, which is the same movie Tom, Maddie, and Sonic were watching in the first movie. You know what's funny? Like, borderline legitimately humorous? Wade has a moment that, again, goes on for a little too long, where he tries to, very unconvincingly, suggest that he didn't know that his father would be at the bowling tournament they're going to, and that it had no bearing on why he was heading to Reno in the first place. And even though no human being would ever buy this act, Knuckles is so no-nonsense that it doesn't even register as any form of sarcasm to him, nor can he see that Wade is obviously lying. Like, that's the only reason this works. If any other character believed Wade, it would just take you out of the story so much, but it works here by virtue of who Knuckles is portrayed to be in this universe. Not stupid, just very naive. Wade grabs an old Discman and shows Knuckles his old mix CD and tries to explain to Knuckles what a jam is, and is confused when Knuckles says that he doesn't have a favorite song, despite the fact that he didn't even know what music was until like a few days ago. So, when they showed what Wade's childhood room looked like, I was bracing myself for a rather risque joke. Maybe something to do with a magazine or a poster. Nope, it was a cardboard cutout, and Knuckles calls attention to some white indents on the cutout, which Wade claims are from him hugging her too hard. Uh-huh. And then Knuckles points out, those indents are everywhere. I don't think that those are from hugs, especially not when this happens next to a cabinet that says Wood's Edge on it. I'm honestly kind of impressed that they allowed this joke to happen because, come on, pun not intended. There is just something so surreal about Knuckles the Echidna watching Pretty Woman starring Julia Roberts with a Jewish woman on Shabbat eating key lime pie. That's a sentence that I have to say to describe this show. This episode is just bonkers, dude. Okay, so a bunch of goons show up to the Whipple household to claim the bounty on Wade, and there's a scene with a guy wielding a chain who's about to attack Wanda, and in what is probably the only time she's made me even chuckle so far, she's just laughing in the dude's face, calling him a 90s looking video game character, which is a pretty spot-on insult, but then he just absolutely kicks ass and is dope as hell with his chain. Knuckles and Wendy start beating the shit out of the two other goons, and having Wade's mom hold her own may seem out of pocket, but it was foreshadowed earlier in the episode when they mentioned during dinner that she knew Krav Maga. So she busts out the martial arts in a shot that's just going around the kitchen as the four of them fight, which is already badass by itself, but then they do it to the tune of Hava Nagila, which is just fucking hilarious. Also, I couldn't help but notice that Wendy isn't played by Stockard Channing during this fight scene, which, I mean, of course she's not. The woman's 80 for Christ's sake, but I was totally enthralled during the first go-around. I only noticed it on a repeat viewing, and it's pretty obvious. And as batshit as this episode was, it ends in a kinda sweet way, with the family and Knuckles just being thankful they're all there for Shabbat as they watch the last two candles go out on their own, symbolizing the end of Shabbos. It's a cute little ending that really makes Knuckles feel like part of the Whipple family, which, I mean, I didn't realize it would be so sweet, especially considering that he's meant to be part of the Wachowski family, but he just fits here more.
They were personal attacks!
It's very humorous to start the episode off with the house just being completely wrecked, and yet Wade's just having a good morning. I wasn't sure if Wade getting kidnapped was planned at all by Knuckles, but if it wasn't, it's in direct contrast to what just happened in the last episode where he saved Wade, so why is he suddenly of the attitude that he needs to save himself? That doesn't make any sense. It turns out that Wade's captor is Jack Sinclair, also trying to claim the bounty we heard about 2 episodes ago. We see that he's wearing the hat that people love to go nuts over for some reason. I mean, Jesus, it was only ever in that one OVA, calm down. I'm curious to see how that goes about, like how and why Knuckles ends up with it. Jack has this excellent joke about finding the cage he trapped Wade in on Facebook Marketplace of all places, truly the new Craigslist, and about how the guy he bought it from was a total weirdo, and I think the joke got to me because there's layers to it. For one, I love that no one verbally called attention to the cage itself. Wade was just sort of visually acknowledging it. Then, Jack says his line about the seller being a weirdo, which would make sense given, like, why would you have a cage like this to sell in the first place, only to realize that not only is Jack the kind of weirdo who now has the cage, but has decked it out in his own branding, and then they just kind of move on from it. It's delivered so well, like they want you to acknowledge what he's saying and what the joke is at first, but they don't want you thinking about it for too long because it's just funnier that way. But then he has this just bizarre rainforest cafe joke, I think. I don't know, I've never been, but it just feels so random, like I'm watching a sketch comedy YouTube video. Whoa! I just noticed that this episode is called The Flames of Disaster, which is a Sonic 06 reference. What? You know, it's very ironic that Wade points out that the story that Jack is about to tell him about the fable of the scorpion and the frog goes on forever, because there's a lot of scenes in this very show that are exactly like that. Funnily enough, you would expect that Jack is going to extend the fable because he's in the middle of telling it, but it's way shorter than a lot of the really overdrawn scenes in this show, and it kind of just feels like the writers are making fun of the audience at this point. The first act is pretty much concluded, and Knuckles has been in one scene so far, which, again, is just very frightening, I guess, because it just doesn't make sense to me why this show is so Wade-centric. Like, in a way, I kind of understand why that is. I just don't think that Wade should be the focus of it. It seems like it starts off as the Knuckles show, and then halfway into the first episode, it becomes the Wade show, with Knuckles as a secondary character, and even then, he's only in it sometimes. Okay, so Wade's trying to desperately escape the cage, and he gets a call from Knuckles, look at that, nice of you to join your own show, who tells him to enter a meditative state so that he can communicate with the ancient Echidnas? What the hell? Jack shocks him, and I'm not sure if Wade is in a dream state or if he's actually having a spiritual experience, because he's meeting Pachacamac at the bowling alley, but he doesn't know what Pachacamac looks like, meaning that this must actually be happening, and, like, how did he manage to do that on his first try? Pachacamac reveals that this is Wade's own personal battleground in the sky, basically to mean his own heaven, and the fact that it's just a bowling alley is, I don't know, a little sad. While I appreciate a joke at the expense of Pachacamac's name, again, it's a sequence that goes on just a little bit too long, and I do think the joke suffers for it. Like, if you had it maybe once or twice, it could work, but when you just do the joke over and over again, it loses its charm because it insists on itself. And not only that, but Wade said his name correctly before when Knuckles mentions it in episode 1.
Pachacamac did for me.
Pachacamac.
He repeats the name effortlessly and makes a dumbass joke about his sister going to sleepaway camp there. Another form of comedy this show has sometimes, and this is really only coming up while on the subject of stuff I don't think is funny, is stating one thing and then the opposite happens. That's one of the most predictable forms of comedy, and while it can work sometimes, I'm not gonna pretend that it does often. So, Wade says that Knuckles must have sent him here to teach him the next lesson, and has Knuckles even taught Wade anything? I don't think he has. I feel like Knuckles has perhaps learned more from Wade, even though that wasn't even the focus of the episode. This is the second time I think that the show has left me speechless, with the first time being the one where he may or may not have jizzed on cardboard, but this time it's because the show is now presenting me with Adam Pally, voiced by Idris Elba, dressed up as Knuckles the Echidna in a sort of spiritual but also like maybe brain-damaged fantasy where he's going to roleplay in a rock opera with Pachacamac guiding him through it. I don't think my mind can comprehend how anybody came up with this one, and no one said no to it. I will admit, I think it's a bit too bizarre for me to find funny. I don't think it's unfunny, I just think there are way too many moving parts in this setup. And now we're going to explore Knuckles' backstory through this rock opera, which is a funny way of doing it, but I feel like something of this nature could have been done in a more serious way. And it sucks that I have to say that, given that this is a comedy show, and I understand that, but it's like, I don't know, I feel like the show had something going early on with its more touching character interactions, and now we're just defaulting to doing this comedic material. And I get it, it would feel repetitive to constantly slow down the action to have a conversation where the characters relate to each other, and as far as exposition goes, a rock opera is a pretty creative way to do it. I just feel like the showrunners could have come up with ways around some of these concepts to still fully involve both characters and have some serious emotional moments that aren't undercut by the comedy. What in the absolute fuck? Why was Knuckles' dad a puppet for that one shot and then that was it? What were they on when they made this? Okay, so future Chari here, my fellow Project Shadowcast member Random Goon brought to my attention that this may have been a jab at Ken Penders, the dude that wrote and penciled a bunch of old Archie Sonic comics, a lot of them being weird, to put it incredibly mildly, and has the ownership over the Echidna characters he created despite being based on a Sega property, many of whom were related to Knuckles in some way. Something I think is kind of weird about showing Knuckles' perspective on the war between the Owls and the Echidnas is that his account just feels unreliable, given that Knuckles isn't here to tell it. Like, I guess we're meant to believe this is how it happened, but I also don't feel like we can know that for sure. It's worth mentioning that this also isn't exactly new information. This is stuff about Knuckles that we as the audience know, but Wade would have had no way of knowing. They do a cute little nod to Sonic 3 with Wade running through Angel Island Zone, very nice. But I also almost completely missed that due to the fact that Michael Bolton is in this now for some reason as the voice of Wade dressed up as Knuckles. Was there anything Paramount said no to? You know, other than including Knuckles in his own show? Okay, so he's going through a Sonic 2 style special stage grabbing rings in it, and then these, like, stage performers who you wouldn't normally see because they're wearing completely black morph suits are just pantomiming and holding paper mache buzz bombers with strings, and it's fucking hilarious, just on a bunch of different levels, because the rest of the stage is on full-on color, and so the performers aren't hidden at all. And this is where the Flames of Disaster part comes in, because now I think they're giving Silver's backstory to Knuckles? The rock opera is about him trying to find the Flames of Disaster, and now a giant fire creature has come out who looks vaguely like Iblis. I was not expecting that at all, and now he's on Facebook Marketplace, alright. Weirdly, Wade kinda just ignores the lesson that they're trying to teach him, which is not a good lesson in the first place because they try to tell him that Knuckles' power comes from his heart, but we never really see that. In the rock opera, Knuckles' journey had nothing to do with believing in himself or self-doubt or overcoming anything like that, so it kind of makes sense why Wade would think Knuckles' power comes from his fists. He wakes back up in the real world and tries to punch his way out of this prison, and it just makes the whole thing feel like a gigantic waste of time that really wasn't that funny. I will say that the payoff was that this is like the third or fourth time he's gotten shocked by touching the cage bars, and each time an automated voice has told him to not touch the bars. This time around, it tells him, no, seriously, please do not touch the bars. I gotta admit, that got me. Okay, what they do for Adam Pally dressed up as Knuckles gliding made me burst out laughing because from his chest down, he's now in a black morph suit, and then he just has a really tiny body behind him and his arms are sticking out with metal rods that he's holding. Not to mention that the footage is like sped up for some reason, and it's just a hilarious image. A little side note, I think it's interesting that they got Michael Bolton to sing about how Knuckles always had the Flames of Disaster within him because a warrior's strength comes from his heart, when he was also the dude that sang a version of I Can Go the Distance from Disney's Hercules, which has almost verbatim the exact same message. Which, if I may rewind for a little bit, the whole point of Knuckles' journey was to find this newly adapted version of the Flames of Disaster, which led him to the Iblis creature, only for him to find out that it was inside him all along, but why come here then? I don't know, this whole theme seems not entirely well thought out. Wait, that worked? Why did that work? Wade just busted out of the cage he was in, landed like Knuckles does, and he's completely unharmed with no more than an ow. Up until this point, humans in this continuity kind of still abided by the laws of physics, so that was just a really weird thing to have happened. Another one of the jokes that goes on for a little too long is when Jack Sinclair and Wade are like an entire road apart from each other and they just have this constant miscommunication. It's not a novel joke by any means, but the way it's performed still manages to make it funny in spite of how overdrawn it is. Something that's funny in a pretty subtle way is that Jack Sinclair seems like this batshit insane bounty hunter, and when he pulls out the katanas you think, oh man, he's fully committed to killing Wade if he has to. And then when the time comes to it, not only does he not do it, but he freaks out because Wade is fully committed to beheading him. Like, it's not a laugh out loud moment by any means, but when you think about it, damn dude, Wade really was gonna kill that guy. So another moment that got me really good was when Wade is saying hi to Susie's parents and is kind of apologizing for everything just getting out of control, and then is immediately interrupted by Susie's mom telling him to go ahead and kill Jack. I was not expecting that. I got a lot of these really laugh out loud moments from just the absurdity and the shock of not knowing something was going to happen. I will say that this is a pretty big character moment for Wade, and you really see a shift in him, I think. He's a lot more confident, and though it doesn't exactly feel earned, mostly because the rock opera sequence felt kind of pointless when you consider that this was a lesson he could have and maybe should have learned from Knuckles directly, I still somehow managed to feel happy for him. Although that is kind of immediately undercut when you remember that the hat and motorcycle Wade just won off of Jack now go to Knuckles, who literally did nothing to earn it. This was Wade's victory, but the spoils all go to Knuckles. Like, legitimately, he's in 4 scenes in this episode, one of which was off screen. At the beginning when Wade is kidnapped, he calls Wade to tell him to meditate, he's there when Wade comes back after his journey, and then he's the one driving the motorcycle in the last shot. That's what's frustrating about this being called Knuckles, because despite the fact that he is the most prominent Sonic character in this is not a show about him. We don't really learn a lot about him in this episode because what's told to us about his past isn't really all that new. Like, yeah, we learned that he fought a fire monster that may or may not be Iblis and discovered a power that we didn't know he had, which was the whole reason he was fighting the monster in the first place, but nothing about that story really changes our outlook on the character at all. And I get it, we're probably not supposed to because not everyone who watches the movies is going to watch the show, and I think that maybe that's the attitude they're having with this, but it just makes the character's inclusion in the show feel irrelevant and boring. Not only that, but in this episode, Knuckles is kind of a hypocrite because he lets Wade get kidnapped by a bounty hunter and essentially tells him that he needs to figure out how to escape the cage on his own, when in episode 2, Knuckles couldn't do that exact thing, needing to be saved by Wade. I've seen people cite this episode as the worst one, and given that I'm writing the script almost immediately after watching the show myself, I'm not exactly sure what elements people take issue with, but I suspect a huge part of it is just how little Knuckles is in this episode, which is a fair criticism. And while I'm disappointed by that too, I feel like the reason I wasn't a huge fan of this episode is more to do with all the things in it that don't make sense or just weren't executed well. I think functionally the episode is fine, as it shapes Wade's character arc probably more than any episode before it. It just does it in a way that prioritizes the comedy a bit too much, that it gets in the way of the storytelling for me.
Let's get ready to roll some bowling balls.
Finally, we get a hip-hop song. Damn, it feels good to be a gangsta. Probably would not have been my choice to represent Knuckles, but also not unfitting.
Kevin James is headlining here.
The mall cop?
Knuckles has not only seen Paul Blart Mall Cop and recognizes Kevin James as the man who plays him, but just has the biggest smile on his face when he mentions him. Dude just really likes Paul Blart. I'm only just now kind of realizing that Knuckles is out in the open here in Reno at the National Bowling Stadium, and no one seems to give a shit. Like, Sonic had to sort of lay low so that people didn't learn about his existence, and they try to keep a low profile in the second movie. To be fair, I'm sure there was some kind of national headline about some alien saving the world in Montana. I mean, how could there not be? Also, I was surprised to find out that the National Bowling Stadium is an actual thing. This is a place in Reno, Nevada where bowling tournaments take place. We're finally introduced to Wade's dad, Pistol Pete Whipple, who just seems like the biggest tool on the face of the planet, dressed up in nothing but the Union Jack like some magician Captain America-ass looking villain. It's honestly kind of over the top, even for something Sonic related. Like, Robotnik and Jack Sinclair's personalities were over the top, but visually their designs weren't anything too wild. Pistol Pete looks like a character that would show up in the Saturday morning Sonic cartoon, not a live-action adaptation of well, anything, really. They do that thing where they give one character an earbud and then have another character speak for them. It goes as well as you might think, even from a comedic standpoint. It's nothing you wouldn't expect. Like, it's not even predictable because there's no punchline. The punchline is Wade talks like Knuckles does for a little bit. We acknowledge that it's weird, and then Knuckles gets distracted by a huge mascot that very vaguely resembles him, but that he says looks a lot like him, which, okay. I mean, the dude looks like a California raisin, but sure. Not really a funny scene. It's one of those that makes you acutely aware of just how many people are involved in writing for shows like this. Sometimes they don't even work as teams. Some write jokes for one scene, others for another. You know what's weird? Cary Elwes is the one playing Wade's dad, and as I look at them together, all I can think is that there's no way they're that far apart in age, right? It turns out that Cary Elwes is 61 years old and Adam Pally is only 42, so it's entirely possible that he could be Wade's father. It's just that he doesn't really look that much older, and so it's not as convincing, I guess. Wade also keeps making this weird illusion that he and his dad are so much alike, both in terms of their looks and their laughs, and I don't know if that's supposed to be a joke. They obviously don't, and that fact by itself isn't funny. Like, think about it, right? Haha, get it? The joke is that Wade clearly misses his estranged father, whom he thinks he's very similar to because they're father and son, but we, the audience, can clearly tell that's not true. That's funny, right? It would be different if there were someone there to reinforce or dispel what Wade thinks, but the show kind of just rolls with it. Like, if Knuckles were completely on board validating what Wade was saying and seeing similarities where there were none, that would be way funnier. So I was literally about to ask about the gun agents because we have not seen them since episode 2, and I was starting to think that maybe we would never see them again. It took a while for them to come back, and the thing is, this show is only 6 episodes long, and we've only ever seen the main bad guy, like, once or twice. Speaking of which, the buyer starts info dumping on the gun agents, and though it's clearly exposition, it's exposition that at this point I almost welcome because we haven't really gotten anything new or very story relevant throughout the show. The buyer reveals that he not only worked for Gunn at 1.2, but that he worked for Robotnik specifically, who was the head of Gunn when it was a simple military ops program, and dude, that's such a small reveal given that it doesn't change much about the universe at large, but it's also just such a cool idea in my opinion. It recontextualizes a scene in the first movie where Commander Walters wants to bring Robotnik in to identify the issue Sonic caused, despite everyone else's objection to it. Of course he would want to bring him in and even look up to him a little bit. He used to spearhead the operation he's now a commander of. An element of his story I do find odd, though, is when he mentions that once Sonic came into the picture and at the end of the first movie, Gunn tried cutting all ties to Robotnik and anyone who worked under him, even suggesting that they went out and hunted them down. What's weird about it is that aside from Agent Stone, we never saw any other human work for Robotnik. And he even says,
"Human beings are unreliable and stupid, and I care very little about them. But my machines are diligent, relentless. You know what I love about machines? They do what they're told. They follow their program. They're everything to me."
At first, I thought they might have been alluding to Gerald Robotnik, but when the buyer mentions that all this went down after he met a little blue alien and lost his mind, he clearly must be talking about Ivo Robotnik. And right after that, Agent Willoughby starts to info dump herself regarding her own involvement with Gunn and why she's betraying them. She claims that she spent her whole life studying extraterrestrials, and after the gigantic mess Sonic and Robotnik caused in San Francisco in the first movie, she saw them as a threat and holds a grudge against Gunn for letting them just exist in their world, leaving their incredibly powerful sheddings everywhere. And honestly, I get it. It's not an unreasonable thing to feel, especially when you consider that after she raised these concerns, they basically punished her by demoting her to more office-type jobs where her responsibilities consisted of ordering gift cards and planning fake weddings, referencing events from the first 2 films respectively. The Olive Garden gift card that Tom and Maddie received from Commander Walters at the end of the first movie, and Maddie's sister Rachel's wedding from the second one. What I love about these references is how not in your face they are. I feel like a lot of properties of this kind would go out of their way to be hyper-specific so that you knew exactly what they were talking about, or even just straight up show you a flashback or something, but this show trusts its audience to not only have watched those movies, because why would you start with Knuckles, but also to remember them without having to be reminded. It's different from the beginning of the show when Sonic recaps the events of the second movie, because there, he's contextualizing the story before we start, and not necessarily for a laugh. It's kind of disappointing to me that her exposition kind of confirms that all the quills the buyer has are from Knuckles and not from the Echidna tribe. I just feel like that would lend more credence to the whole "I've been studying extraterrestrials my whole life" thing. Unless she means another kind of extraterrestrial. I guess I should mention it now, just because it kind of wasn't that relevant when it happened in episode 2, but Agent Mason's whole backstory is that he used to fight in bare-knuckle underground fight clubs, and he joined Gunn as an excuse to fight bigger foes like extraterrestrials, where he no longer had to hold back or fight fair. And even though it's not the coolest or most detailed backstory, I appreciate that it's not overly elaborate, whereas Willoughby's is. Hers is a very serious backstory that you can kind of sympathize with, whereas Mason's is one that doesn't need to tie back to anything. Sometimes simplicity like that really works, not just because it reflects their characters' personalities, but because it feels a lot more genuine that way. Having both of them just be in it for the challenge could work, but would maybe feel a little convoluted as it pertains to their motivations. On the other hand, having both of them be in it due to a mutual hatred for Gunn would have maybe felt too convenient. Possible and maybe even workable, but I feel like you then have to get into why all of the villains are working against Gunn. Having each of them have a slightly different motivation that ties them together, I respect it. I wasn't sure how much I liked that Willoughby info dumped right after the buyer had. It almost felt like too much exposition all at once, but what made it work for me was that Willoughby having her backstory be explained now makes sense story-wise. She's only recounting it because they're pleading with the buyer to give them another chance, and wants to show how passionately she hates Gunn and why. Mason couldn't have had this moment, and when he tells Wade his motivation, it's done in a slightly more comedic way, reflecting his personality. This is a scene that really works for me, and I wish the show had more moments like it. That whole segment with the ESPN dudes sucked. Not a bit of it was funny. Now we have a montage of the bowling tournament itself, which is exactly what I want to see in a Knuckles show. And a little visual gag that I thought was kind of humorous is that, again, Pistol Pete is just very overly English. His bowling ball is transparent and has a little teacup in it. I don't know why, that just tickled me a little bit. Some of these bowling team names are admittedly pretty funny. Actually, I feel like there's no way that they aren't actual real-life bowling team names. You got stuff like Balls to the Wall, Don't Give a Split, Ball Busters, Split Happens, Split for Brains. Just a bunch of replacing the word shit for split. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, at this point in the montage, which has already been going on for a little bit, I'm already so bored and just want to see Knuckles again. Okay, no, but seriously, at this point, I feel like the showrunners are just playing a prank on Sonic fans because this is still going, dude. I don't feel like I'm watching a Sonic the Hedgehog show. It feels like one of those low-budget sport comedies from the mid-2000s that your weird uncle remembers all the lines to. Right after the longest 3 minutes of my fucking life, more if you count the lame-ass ESPN Ocho bullshit, we cut to more Wade and his dad. Oh my god, I know that we just got a pretty great scene with the show's villains, but why do you feel like you have to make up for it with a further lack of the main character? He wasn't even at the tournament to watch Wade. What the hell? Oh, what? Suddenly he can't be in public anymore? Strangely enough, I think one of the best jokes so far in the show is during this scene though. They cut to Pistol Pete and Wade just sitting at a bar talking, and Pete reveals that he just finished telling Wade all about the birds and the bees, and he's surprised that Wade didn't already know about all this, only for Wade to admit that, nah, he knew all about it, he's just always wanted to have the talk. Not necessarily with his dad, all he says is that he's always wanted to have the talk. It's just such a funny setup that this is what they've been doing to catch up right after the tournament, and it's something that he didn't even need. Again, I feel like any other comedy would make Wade so infantilized that he genuinely wouldn't even know how sex worked, but I appreciate that they almost do a sort of anti-joke here. And it's immediately followed by a weirdly touching scene where Pete is just being a really nice guy, turning fans away because he's with his son, and seems legitimately apologetic over not having been in Wade's life for most of it. And as an ultimate gesture, he shows that he kept most of Wade's mix CDs. I was fully expecting Pistol Pete to be a gigantic swinging dick, and maybe this was the gotcha moment where he starts talking down on Wade or making fun of him and telling him that he has no chance of winning the tournament. But no, it never happens. Unless, of course, the gotcha moment is going to come later and he's just using the mix CDs as a sort of emotional manipulation, in which case, yeah, fuck him, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see where that goes. That's just what I'm predicting right now. But, I mean, like, really think about it. Earlier, we find out that Pete didn't even know Wade was going to be here, so he would have no reason to be carrying the CD case with all the Wade jammers. He even, like, wholesomely apologizes to Wade. Nothing is played for laughs. Everything is played straight, aside from the birds and the bees joke from the beginning. At the end of the scene, they do some excellent framing work where they pull away from a hug and you can see Wendy in the distance, who's clearly hurt by Wade reconnecting with his father, and it's honestly sad, like actually. She goes to his room and she tries to remind him how much it hurt when Pete abandoned them, how he's likely to do it again. And much like the last scene, no part of it is played for laughs. It's a very serious conversation. As well, we get a very mature exchange with Wade, who tells his mom that despite how she might feel about his father, he would still like to try and explore the possibility of them having some kind of relationship. All I could think of was how I wish more conversations in the show had been handled like this. Not all of them, I still think you can have laughs, but I just wish there was more of a balance. In the scene before, Pete had invited Wade to his sky lobby so that they could continue to catch up, and for a second, I thought they were playing a jazzy rendition of Casino Night Zone's music. Not gonna lie, I kinda wish they had been.
Listen, Wade, I am sorry for this.
Ah, there it is, there's the betrayal. It happened pretty much like I expected it would, although it doesn't really invalidate what I was saying earlier because it seems like this kind of just happened last minute. And to be fair, he apparently didn't require a lot of convincing from Mason and Willoughby, and kidnapping Wade's family was his idea, so don't get me wrong, he's still a huge piece of shit, but at least it seems like their interaction earlier was, in some part, genuine, even if he is a massive tool. Okay, prediction. I think I know exactly where this is going, because Pete is telling Wade to give them Knuckles, but he doesn't call him by name. He calls him Wade's big, furry red friend, and given what we saw earlier in the episode about how Knuckles thought the California Raisin looked exactly like him, I bet that's gonna come back in some form. I would normally say Wade is an asshole for quite seriously not giving even a remote shit that they're pointing a gun at his sister's head and threatening to kill her first, but I kinda get it. She's been nothing but a bitch this whole time, except for during the montage where she was in full support of Wade, but other than that, she's just been a terrible human being. So, I'm really glad that I'm Latino for the scene where they show Knuckles just chilling in his hotel room watching what I'm assuming is some fucking Telemundo parody, because they're showing, like, the final passion or whatever, and what's hilarious to me is that the voice on the TV announcing it is a text-to-speech that's been in use since, like, the late 2000s called Loquendo. It was very popular in Spanish online communities, and if you remember or
Microsoft Spam.
this was our equivalent to that. Loquendo walked so that
Cringy TikTok AI voices could run.
Próximamente en el canal en español de Reno. Próximamente en el canal en español de Reno.
the episode ends with Wade giving up Knuckles and tricking him at the request of the bad guys to send him up to the penthouse suite where they plan to ambush him. He makes up an excuse for Knuckles to come with him, and another one to send him up the elevator alone, and Knuckles calls him his friend. You can see the pain on Wade's face about having to do this, and it's surprisingly effective. Like, I do feel bad for Wade because you understand why he's doing this, but it's also a little disappointing that there was nothing he could do to warn Knuckles. I was half expecting him to do something with his eyes or like some kind of hand gesture to warn him, and it never came. Also, you might have noticed something which admittedly I didn't even realize myself when I first watched this episode. Much like episode 4, Knuckles is really only there at the beginning of the episode and at the end of the episode. He's definitely in more scenes than in episode 4, but that's not saying much. He's there when they arrive in Reno and up until Wade and Pete initially reunite. Then we never see him again until after every major story beat has happened and he's just chilling in a hotel room. I love that in both episodes he's absent from, it's not even remotely because he was doing anything important, he was just hanging out while Wade did stuff.
Knuckles the Echidna. It's an honor to meet you at last.
Called it! I'm not entirely sure how just yet, but they do end up using the stupid mascot costume from the last episode as a bait and switch. Oh, damn, they actually did something really smart. So in the last episode, when Wade was talking to Pete, he had an AirPod in so that Knuckles could listen in on the conversation and tell him what he had to say, and they reveal that Knuckles had an AirPod in and was listening in the whole time. My only issue with it is that we never see Knuckles put an AirPod in the first place. During that scene in episode 5, we only ever see Wade put an AirPod in, and maybe because he only has one in, we're supposed to infer that Knuckles is wearing the other one? I don't know, it doesn't really work. It doesn't make sense why they wouldn't be at least a little bit more visually explicit here. In fact, the more I think about it, the less sense this makes. How would Knuckles have been listening into this conversation the whole time? The gun agents had to start a call with Wade, right? Otherwise, how are they communicating? And why would Knuckles still have an AirPod in? Did Wade think maybe something would happen with his dad and so Knuckles asked to listen in? I don't know, I just feel like Wade was taken by surprise and so this doesn't make any sense. I initially thought it was smart because they set it up earlier in the last episode and so the payoff was happening now in this one, but the problem is that they never established how these different moving parts come together for this surprise to work. How did they get the mascot costume in the elevator? Wasn't Knuckles going straight up to the penthouse suite? Did the elevator stop at some point and mascot dude got on? They had all the elements for something like this to work, even at a base level, but none of it was put together well. Wade has a really funny moment when he's rescuing his mom and sister where he admits that he's locked himself inside handcuffs so many times that Tom eventually gave him a master key. That's actually a really funny Deus Ex Machina that feels in line with the character in the universe. I especially like that the joke doesn't forget that Wade, despite all the progress he's made throughout the show and how competent he shows himself to be as a bowler, is still a pretty incompetent deputy. The sequence where the gun agents are getting sucked into the warp rings is really cool, although it's weird because the warp rings have never really worked like that. They've always acted as portals, but they've never sucked anybody in anywhere. But whatever, they've served their function narratively. Now I'm just left to wonder where on Earth they ended up, and it's cool that the rings ended up sort of absorbing each other and just kind of disappearing. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, there's a really good payoff in the scene right after that where Wanda gets free of the handcuffs she was in, all because she was too proud to let Wade help. During the action sequence, she tells him that she's going to use a technique where she has to break her thumb to get out of them, and near the end of the scene, it's revealed that she managed to do it, and her hand is comedically fucked up. But that by itself isn't what got me. What got me was Knuckles giving her a thumbs up, which she returns, but because her hand is all mangled now, her thumb is just dangling to the side. It's just another really good visual gag that's funnier to me the more I really stop to think about it, which is kind of surprising given that it's a payoff to a joke whose setup was another one that just goes on for a little too long. Okay, the ESPN announcers actually finally managed to make me laugh. They're talking about the rumors surrounding Pete abandoning Wade at a TJ Maxx, but instead of any kind of sympathy towards Wade or being scandalized by Pete, they take the time to bring up that no matter how you feel about the situation, and for the record, they're against it, the deals at TJ Maxx just can't be beat. And you know what this joke reminds me of? The fucking Olive Garden running gag from the movies. The first one had these weird product placements that were a little too specific and explicit, like Zillow and the Olive Garden. I feel like they were called out on it, and so they kind of leaned into it for the second movie, which was great. And with the TJ Maxx thing, I feel like it's an extension of that joke. And honestly, I can't tell if it is product placement or not, because here, they're speaking highly of it, but the rest of the show makes you think about it being the place where child abandonment happens.
Well, I wish my dad left me at a TJ Maxx.
I've said it before, and I will say it again, this feels like a random sports comedy film that you would find the DVD for at a flea market, and you're just like, man, this looks like it could be funny. And I mean, it is, but you also kind of just watch it once and then never again. Where is Knuckles throughout all this? Like seriously, it feels like a joke at our expense at this point with how little Knuckles there is just in this episode alone. This show is so Wade focused, so focused on the damn bowling tournament and nothing else that it's hard to not be distracted by it. And I almost feel like the show was kind of made to see how many adult jokes they could get away with, because they straight up just say,
look at the balls on this guy. Oh, tit for tat.
It just feels like they want to say the naughty words, which can be funny. I mean, I was giggling at the team names earlier, but in this instance, it just feels crass and not related to anything that's happening at all. You know, other than the bowling. That still doesn't make it a good joke, though. We get a scene of Knuckles sitting at the bar where Wade and Pete were earlier, where the only two jokes in it are that he thinks this planet is weird because a dude in a mascot costume comes up and orders beer, and then asks the bartender for challah bread. We got a little bit more of the bowling tournament, and both Whipples are neck and neck. Nothing much else to say about it, but it serves as an excellent cut in between the last Knuckles scene and the next one, where we cut back to see that he actually did get some challah bread, and that's a pretty good joke. Oh, okay, the buyer's just here. I'm not gonna lie, it would have been really nice if this character had more of a setup. I mean, this is the first time he and Knuckles are even meeting. It's a shame because I really believe that Rory McCann could have made for a way more badass villain had he been given more screen time. He honestly does have an intimidating presence in the show, but he doesn't do much of anything until now, except for, I guess, giving the gun agents the weapons to fight Knuckles in the first place. There's a moment where Wade is sort of confronting his father before the crucial last bowl that he needs to do in order to win the tournament, talking about how he was taught by the greatest warrior in the galaxy, who taught him all these things about how true strength comes from within, and the importance of the warriors that came before them, and it would have been a very meaningful moment had that actually happened in the show. I wish it had. Wade learns those things in Knuckles' presence, I guess, but there were times Knuckles wasn't even in the scene for Wade to learn these things. It almost feels like the show wants to convince the audience in the 11th hour that that's what happened, but it's not. In spite of that though, it's honestly kind of touching when Wade does win the tournament, and I like that he wins after Pete fails to get a strike in the exact same way that Wade did at the beginning of the show, which cost him his spot on the team in the first place. It's kind of a small thing, right? Because despite the fact that the whole show was leading up to this moment, it has been pretty unpredictable so far, to the point that I wasn't sure if he was going to win or not, and what the lesson for that would even be. Even if he had lost, that doesn't take away from his growth, so when he wins, it does feel nice, and you feel happy for Wade because you feel like he earned it. I'm not gonna lie, I was confident that the fight with Knuckles was either going to interrupt the tournament before Wade was able to do his last throw, or that Knuckles would get knocked into the building, causing the last pin to fall, and I'm kinda glad that wasn't the case. It gives Wade a legitimate win instead of relying on making it dependent on luck, and leaving us wondering whether or not he actually would have won on his own merit. So Knuckles gets his power taken by the buyer, and Wade is doing his best to take a stand. Even though he's bluffing, this is probably the bravest we've ever seen him, and as the buyer approaches, Wade's mom and sister appear out of nowhere in a bowling pin car, which looks really weird from the perspective when it first shows up. They make it look microscopic and not even like a real car until they cut to the next shot. They hand him the gloves that Agent Mason used throughout the show, and I don't know how they did any of this so quickly. Were they carrying the gloves with them just in case? Where did they get this bowling pin car? Why would they have been prepared for a moment like this? Wade gives his heartwarming speech while Knuckles remains unconscious, and he's using the power of the gloves to throw bowling balls at the buyer, which I think is kind of cool symbolically, like they're kind of working together. Knuckles' power, but also Wade's heart through the bowling balls, which I just kind of realized might be a reference to episode 1, where Knuckles tosses a bowling ball and just destroys the pins, telling Wade that in due time, he'd be able to do that too. Obviously, not on his own, but it's kind of cool that they give him this moment anyway, and what I like about it the most in retrospect is that, again, they just let the moment speak for itself and don't have to remind the audience that the moment from episode 1 happened. I almost feel like moments like this are better served when you let your audience figure these things out on their own, rather than shove it in their face, even if the callback falls flat. At least if it does, it wasn't then also shoved in our face. I do have a problem with this moment though, and it's Wade's speech. He's talking to Knuckles as if he'd been the one that just went on this journey, and as if he was the one that grew and learned from all this, when that couldn't be further from the truth. This was not Knuckles' journey, it was Wade's. And you could argue that Wade's talking to himself through talking to Knuckles, but I don't know about that. It genuinely seems he's trying to get through to Knuckles and convince him that he has a home on Earth now, but again, that's not what the point of the show was, so it just falls flat and seems very strange. I wish that had been an element of the show they focused on a bit more, since it was a huge basis for the very first episode. Knuckles conjures up the flames of disaster after Wade's speech, which, you could have seen coming because this is the true power that comes from within, and it was a huge basis for episode 4, but having the technique be that his fists are on fire just makes me think of the maximum heat Knuckles attack from Sonic Adventure. It's probably the same technique, just with another name, which makes it extra weird because the flames of disaster are technically the monster Knuckles tried to get it from, but it makes more sense to say that Knuckles was on a quest to find the flames of disaster, rather than to say he was on a quest to find the maximum heat attack. They kill the buyer by dropping a giant ball on him, which I wonder if that was intentional given all the bowling. We come back to see Pete trying to steal the tournament trophy, which I'm surprised he didn't try to do while we were all outside, and we get just the most abrupt, "we did it!" fake out ending with an 80s ass freeze frame of them about to do a high five, and I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty lame and not even in a way that's particularly funny or charming. The show rolls some credits, but properly ends with them presumably heading back to Green Hills, and Wade suggesting they listen to a new mix he made, with the first song being the show's theme song. Knuckles recognizes that, as they were talking about in episode 3, this song makes him feel invigorated, pumped up. He recognizes this as his jam, and while it's cute, I don't really like how Idris Elba delivered the line. It just doesn't sound like something this version of Knuckles would ever sound like. Also, what's tough for me to accept during this moment is that this song is supposed to be Knuckles' jam, not just because it's not music that really makes me think of Knuckles, but because when you read the lyrics to the song, it's clear who it fits more. Knuckles technically does have his own theme song in this show, played at the end of episode 2, and while I can't play it for you due to copyright concerns, all you have to know is that it was one of 2 original songs composed for the show, the other being the rock opera from episode 4, and it sounds less like a Knuckles theme and more like what a Knuckles theme would sound like if Wade wrote it. And with the intro to this show being us flipping through the pages of a CD case with drawings and animations that show how close Knuckles is to Wade, the different ways in which they supposedly train, the fact that Wade's playing a different instrument in each episode's intro, and the fact that after we close the CD case, we can see that it says property of Wade Whipple, there should be no question as to who the main character of this show is, and it's obviously not Knuckles. Having said all that, what did I think about this show overall? Honestly, I had a fun time with it. Not every joke landed, but the ones that did landed pretty hard. I do wonder, however, if I only think that by association. Do I think those jokes are funny on their own, or do I think their comedy is exacerbated to me because I know this is an official Sonic show? While I feel like that's not entirely untrue, I do think that the show's comedy stands on its own for the most part, especially since there were so many times the jokes didn't even rely on Knuckles' presence at all. And see, to me that's the thing. I've seen people be very divided on the show when it came to reception. When the first reviews came out and the show was getting high scores, I was admittedly a little nervous just because I know a lot of the outlets that would cover stuff like this are part of general audiences that are not necessarily Sonic fans. Not that I think a lower rating would have meant that it would have appealed more to us, but what it said to me was that there was something there that appealed more to people who weren't Sonic fans, and while, please do not misunderstand me, I fully think that this is a good thing, I knew it had to mean that there was something in their mythology story-wise that was sacrificed. It's a little suspicious when critics think that the first two movies are just okay, slightly above average, and then this show is kind of just being praised across the board. As someone trying to watch this show as a Sonic fan, I get it. I'm completely disappointed. The eponymous character is barely in the show, aside from in the first episode. The storyline is nowhere near focused on him. We barely learn anything new about him to enrich his character, regardless of whether or not it would have had an impact on the upcoming third film. And worst of all, I don't think we would be anywhere near as upset about this if the marketing for this show had been more honest. In my searches, I only ever found one poster that featured Wade on it, and it's not a unique one, given that almost all the other recurring human characters have one just like it. All the trailers, featurettes, bumpers, they all implied that Knuckles would be the main character and the focus of the show. I've seen people argue that fans shouldn't be upset about this because we knew what the premise was ahead of the show's release. Knuckles agrees to train Wade as his protege and teach him the ways of the Echidna warrior, which I guess, in the strictest sense, is true. He does agree to do it, but that doesn't mean it ever happens. It would be fine if Knuckles was still central to his role in guiding Wade, if they had made it a point that, despite trying to teach him everything about becoming a great warrior the way he was taught and learned, Knuckles still manages to learn valuable lessons from Wade throughout their journey together, and I feel like that's what they were going for, but that's not at all what the end result is. Wade is going to Reno, and Knuckles is just there sometimes. Really, what training did they ever do together? Knuckles kind of just lets Wade be most of the time, and it works out fine. There's no effort from either side to train as a warrior, and ultimately it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Obviously you want to market this as a Knuckles show because Knuckles is a recognizable and iconic character that will get fans to watch it. Marketing it as the Wade Whipple show, you know, that tertiary background gag character from the movies, yeah, I don't think that would have reeled too many people in, but it would have been more honest and accurate. And that's where I have to talk about being someone trying to watch this show for what it is. It's pretty decent. It's funny enough, it has some interesting and at times unpredictable premises, decent visuals, well done action sequences. Everyone's bringing their A-game performance-wise, to be perfectly honest with you. Would I watch it again? Honestly, yeah. I thought maybe I wouldn't just because of my opinion of it as a Sonic fan, but once you look past that, it's really just a show about people who now have to live in a world where incredibly powerful extraterrestrials exist and how their lives are largely unaffected by it. Even that as a premise is weirdly hilarious to me. It feels like the showrunners wanted to make a slightly different show, one with a lot of heart and hit-or-miss comedics, but higher-ups also wanted to make a Sonic spin-off, and so they kinda just meshed the two concepts together. And here's mostly where I stand on it. It can fail at being one thing, but still succeed at being something else. Am I bothered by the lack of Knuckles in his own show? Yeah, obviously. Are there things I think the show could have done to make the show more narratively engaging? 100%. Am I satisfied with the journey we got? Strangely enough, absolutely. I already liked Wade as a background character, and even though I thought that the premise we were being presented with was hilarious by virtue of who would be starring in it, I think this series does a good job at bringing a character like Wade to the forefront and making him lovable, which, and I cannot stress this enough, I did not sign up for when getting into this show, but even I was surprised at how effective it was. He's a nice guy who really cares about the people around him and overall just wants to prove to himself that he's worth something, and I do think he achieves that. I just wish that the character, whose name is on the marquee, had more of an involvement in the process. I almost wonder if they were worried about the journey changing Knuckles too much, but I don't think they really needed to worry about that. There are totally ways to incorporate the character, but not change him to the degree that it affects his personality in the third film. And it really says something that the guy who directed the first two movies and is directing the third only directed the first episode, the one that feels the most like a Knuckles show and the one that establishes the premise. I was excited to see that Jeff Fowler and Idris Elba were two of the executive producers of the show, and it made me think that we would be getting the show that was being marketed to us. I was a lot less enthused when I realized that there were 5 different directors across this 6-episode show, and while having multiple directors is completely normal for a series such as this, it totally explains why each episode feels so different from each other and why even certain aspects of the show feel disconnected from itself. The show has a style, certainly, but I also feel like each episode was tasked with feeling like its own thing, which in some cases can make a show feel unique and creative, but here, I think it makes it feel less cohesive. I think that there are a lot of things that could have made the show better, but by itself, it's not bad. Again, the biggest crime to me is feeling like the marketing is dishonest. Even the teaser we got right before the show premiered largely featured Sonic, Tails, and Maddie. And now that I think about it, I honestly can't remember what Wade footage we were shown in the trailers. I remember the scene from episode 1 where Knuckles tosses the Wade at him, the shot from episode 2 where he's getting out of the car, which was a fantasy sequence, and the shot from episode 4 where he's dressed up as Knuckles during a spiritual journey. I don't think I remember ever even seeing a bowling ball in his hand in the advertising. Hey everyone, this is Editing Chari here, and as I near the completion of this video, I wanted to step in and note that while I was collecting assets to finish it, specifically this part where I talk about how deceptive the show's promotional material seemed to be, I came across the press page for the show on Paramount Plus's website. It details synopses, cast, elements and their reasons for being in the show, and a bunch of things like that for online publications to include in their coverage of the show. And in it, I found a lot of things that kind of support what I've been talking about. For one, it seems like that observation I kept making about this feeling like a random sports comedy is by design. They wanted the show to give off that vibe specifically, and I just thought it was really funny to see that written out by people who actually worked on the show. Another element that rang true to my observations was Knuckles and Wade's relationship mirroring that of Sonic and Tom's from the first movie, and it was sort of modeled after them. However, as I read through the paragraph that detailed this, even this is trying to make Knuckles' role in the show seem more important than it ends up being, while downplaying Wade's role, and the rest of the page seems to continue to do this. Look no further than the episode log lines. These brief episode descriptions are mostly true, but leave out so much context. Episode 1's is so bare bones that it fails to describe the premise of the actual show, ignoring Wade's involvement in it entirely, even though he occupies like half of the episode and is instrumental in Knuckles' motivation. Episode 2's is only half true. Wade does plan an awesome rescue, but to say that Knuckles confronts his captors is a little deceptive, considering the only way he confronts them is by talking back to them and nothing else. Episode 3's is mostly accurate, but they present it more as Knuckles and Wade needing to hide rather than what the episode actually ends up being about, which is learning more about Wade's family and upbringing. Episode 4's is surprisingly perhaps the most honest, although I don't know that I'd say that Wade sees the world through Knuckles' eyes, more so he learns about his past by being forced to roleplay as him. At least they mentioned that it was a musical episode, I guess. Episode 5's is probably the worst offender because it says that they arrive at the National Bowling Championship, which, again, is true, but you're only describing literally the first thing that happens in the episode, which is not the core of what the episode is about. It's merely the setup for the rest of it. Episode 6's isn't technically untrue, but it's definitely a weird way to describe it. I don't know that their friendship is ever put to the test. It's proved, sure, but being put to the test almost implies that there's something they need to overcome lest their friendship be ruined, which just isn't the case. And you can tell that these log lines are desperately trying to make it seem like the focus of each episode is at least partially on Knuckles himself, but in most cases, they're not. The one time they seem to acknowledge just how Wade-focused the show is when they talk about how Adam Pally and Carrie Elwes had to train with professional bowlers to make their on-screen performances look legit. By starting the section off with, and I quote, because a large part of the story is centered around bowling, which, like I said in the trailer section, I don't think general audiences would have known leading up to the show's release. They even have a section where they describe why they decided to include the ESPN The Ocho segments, lifting them straight from the 2004 sports comedy Dodgeball, A True Underdog Story, claiming that since they put the Easter egg in, they now both occupy the same universe, which... okay. Anyway, I just thought this was interesting and sort of supports what I'm currently saying about the marketing, going so far as intentionally and quite drastically downplaying who and what the show really focuses on, even to the media who was trying to report on what would become the streaming service's #1 most watched series, all under a kind of dishonest marketing campaign. So, to summarize, I enjoyed it overall, and there's a lot of really good elements in it. The biggest problem being that it isn't at all what anyone thought we were getting, and I can completely understand why that would make people upset at the show or even the characters. But, and I know this isn't easy for some of you, when you look past that and accept the show for what it is instead of being upset for what it's not, there's still something there. Does that mean I think you shouldn't be disappointed? Hell no. In a way, I still think Paramount owes us a proper Knuckles show, and you're totally allowed to have your own opinion about it. Just make sure to check in with yourself as to why you're upset about it, and try not to misattribute it to aspects of the show that aren't necessarily at fault. Do you think Wade is annoying by virtue of his character, or is he annoying to you because he's taking the spotlight of a character you thought would be the main protagonist, because those are two very different opinions. And I think a lot of our perceptions toward media are influenced by what we think something should be instead of what it's actually providing. Because it's not giving us something we want it to or expect of it, we can default to thinking it fails at doing what it was designed to. And you can still dislike it even if it does what it was meant to do. Hell, you can dislike it even if it does that thing well. I just think a lot of people's discontent with this show stems from misrepresentations rather than the content itself. It's got laughs in it, it's got heart in it, and in the strictest technical sense, it's got Knuckles in it too. Stay safe and stay awesome, everyone.